Soul Simmers, and welcome back to a brand new speed build. We're doing week 4 of the Builders games, and like always, I want to do a quick introduction for those of you who've never heard of the Builders games. The Builders games are a Sims competition hosted by Simmers for Simmers, and every week we get a brand new challenge. This season's theme is World Tour, so we're doing all kinds of different locations from all over the world. We started with 30 builders, and every week 5 builders go home, and the rest of the group continues to compete against each other, basically. And there's a group of judges who are also all Simmers, and it's mostly just for fun. It's not super serious or anything, but it does create a really interesting challenge because you have to not only keep up with the challenges and the things that you have to build, but you also have to keep up with other people's building talent, which has been extremely challenging. And let me tell you that this week I genuinely thought I was going home because I think that I did a bad job or anything, but everyone this week did such a phenomenal job. So I'm just going to give you a bit of background on the challenge for this week. I'm going to give you a bit of background on this specific build. And also, I'm very sorry if my voice sounds really scuffed. I've been quite sick. I went to London last week, and I guess I picked something up on the airplane, which really sucks, but my voice sounds terrible right now. I'm mostly trying to talk through not coughing. So we're going to see how that goes, but I would love to tell you guys something about these build. This is quite a long speed build because this build took forever. I am not joking if I tell you that I spent about 20 hours on this build. I even had to build a bit over my weekend, even though we built a lot on stream as well. So yeah, this is a long speed build. I hope you still enjoy it nonetheless. And of course, after the voiceover is done, I'll make sure that you guys can just enjoy it with a little bit of music on the background. And hopefully you can take some inspiration from it. I'm actually curious to hear this if you're watching these videos and you like watching speed builds in general. What is like your general takeaway or like your general inspiration that you get from videos like this? Because I always get so much inspiration from watching other people's speed builds, but I'm just really curious to hear what you guys are getting from mine, because it's interesting to hear if there's anything that I might have taught you. So feel free to let me know. At this point, it might be good to actually start talking about the actual challenge, because you might be wondering, what is this girl building? Because some kind of box in a desert. This week's location was Egypt, Cairo, and the assignment was to build a restaurant or lounge. It could be both if you wanted, or the pyramid or the Sphinx. And I personally immediately felt far more inspired by the restaurant prompt than the pyramid or Sphinx one. I immediately knew that building a pyramid would require a lot of tooling, and I already did that for the Svalbard build, which, by the way, if you've missed it, feel free to check it out. I have all of the Builders Games builds linked in a playlist on my channel itself. So if you're ever curious, you've watched maybe one of the builds and you're like, oh, what did she do for all the other weeks? It is linked in a playlist on my channel itself. So feel free to check it out. I'll also make sure to link it in the description box and at the cards so you can quickly navigate to it if you would like to see more speed builds. But like I said, I was definitely more inspired by the restaurant or lounge build. But when I started to do some research, it was actually kind of hard to find a restaurant in Egypt. Not that there's no restaurants in Egypt, because obviously there are, but a lot of them are kind of tucked away in alleyways, don't have their own buildings, but they're kind of like part of an existing building. So finding something that I could make into like a dedicated build in The Sims was actually not super easy, but I think I ended up finding something pretty cool. And I found this restaurant. It is called Khufu's, and I have a little bit of background information on this restaurant if you're interested. So the original Khufu's restaurant is actually located on the Giza Plateau, right next to the three big pyramids, but it also has some small pyramids, the Giza pyramids. It is the first ever restaurant to have a panoramic view of the pyramids, making it a super, super unique spot to eat. Khufu's restaurant stands out as one of the world's first or only high dining experience in terms of Arab or Egyptian food. So it's like it really genuinely tries to combine existing Egyptian culture with a really modern take on it, which I thought was pretty cool. The restaurant's name comes from the pharaoh Khufu, which was the second pharaoh of the 4th dynasty. And actually, this pharaoh is also known as Cheops, which might be a name that you recognize from one of the pyramid's names, because the biggest Giza pyramid is actually called Cheops in international context, but in Egyptian it's actually called Akhet Khufu, which means Khufu's horizon. So that's a little bit of interesting background if you're into history. Personally, I'm someone who is solely into ancient Egypt history. My boyfriend's actually a historian, and a lot of the things he tries to tell me, I'm like, yeah, doesn't interest me at all. I'm just not interested in history. But Egyptian history, for some reason, like the ancient Egypt, has always interested me. It was the one thing that I was obsessed with as a kid. So getting to build something that like represented both modern and ancient Egypt in a way was actually pretty cool to do. That was also the reason that I picked this restaurant in the first place, because I actually found maybe like 3 or 4 contenders of buildings that we could do for this challenge. But I realized that I really liked that mix of modern and ancient Egypt, because I felt like that was a unique take on the challenge, and that was actually feedback that I received from the judges as well, that they really liked how I interpreted this week's challenge. Some interesting things that I can tell you about the build itself that we did is that the building is actually huge. The part that you can see that we're building right now is like half of the building. There's this whole extension part that will build off of the side later, and I wanted to put that there because it actually represented the real building the best. But oh boy, did that create a lot of interior space. It was so hard to come up with a right way to fill that space, because the restaurant that I took as inspiration actually only took up the first 2 floors. The restaurant does have a fantastic 3D model on their own website, so if you're intrigued to see how the IRL one looked, I'll make sure to put the link in the description box. It is very interesting to check it out, because then you can kind of see how well we did in recreating it, because I tried to go for an exact replica of the restaurant. We did some tweaking here and there simply because The Sims doesn't have all the items, but I think we did a pretty darn good job at making it look like the actual restaurant, and that was also feedback I got from the judges, that it looked so much like the actual build. But the challenge was that because it looked so much like the actual build, we created a huge indoor space that I needed to fill, because I didn't just want to leave it empty. So I actually researched a little bit in Arab cultures, or specifically Egyptian cultures. Even though I had been there long time ago, there were still some things that I was like, let me make sure that I get my information right before I put stuff in the build. So I ended up adding 2 different communal spaces in this build on basically the 3rd floor and the roof terrace that you can see that we're creating right now. And on the building on the side, I created a second communal space. So the things that I added was a shisha or shuka lounge. I will call it shisha for the rest of the video because that's simply how I know it. But I know in some languages it's called a shuka lounge, and a hammam. And I would like to give you a little bit of background information on both of those things, because maybe for you it might be something that you've never heard of before. So I'd like to tell you something, because that's, I think, one of the funnest parts of this entire challenge, is learning more about different cultures. So a shisha lounge is mostly accessible for men. They do have a couple that you can visit when you're a tourist. I actually visited one of those when I was in Egypt, but in general most shisha lounges are only accessible for men, and they almost always have a lot of lower sofas or pillows on the floor. They have a lot of like colored lighting or RGB lighting, and they also have a lot of carpets both on the floor as on the wall, so like a lot of tapestries. I think it's funny that they have a lot of RGB lighting, because generally in like Arab countries, also a lot of my neighbors are actually from different places in the world, and they have like far cooler lighting. So whenever I see my neighbor's house, I can really see that they use far more blue light compared to in Western countries. We tend to use far more like warmer light bulbs, so the color temperature is super different, which I thought was kind of interesting to see with the shisha lounges that I researched, that most of them have really like cozy and colored lighting, which is very contradictory to what kind of lighting they use elsewhere. So that was like one of those details that really stood out to me. And something else that I always wonder about is how they keep all of like the rugs and the tapestries clean in a shisha lounge, because there's obviously a lot of smoke, like literally a lot of smoke from people smoking shisha. But like, how do you keep them clean? Do they clean them regularly? This is just one of those weird questions that I'm like, I just need to know. How does this work? I need to know the kind of back end of things. That's just my brain. I am always curious about more details. And then for the building that we did off the side, like I mentioned, we added a hammam. And a hammam is basically a version of an old Roman bathhouse, but it was first adopted in Morocco, into Arab culture, but it's now actually largely adopted through different Arab countries. Traditionally, hammams are a place for the community, no matter of class, to meet up and socialize. Like in many Arab countries, they are very strictly gender separated. And in this build, I kind of specifically imagined that the men would be able to go to the shisha lounge, and that the women would be able to go to the hammam. And then they kind of can come together or have some family time in the restaurant, if that makes any sense, which I thought was kind of like a cool cultural representation. And I really like the fact that I got to add 3 communal spaces into one lot. Basically, if you put this in your game, you would have a lot of things to do with your Sims on this specific lot. I made sure to build it as a fully functional restaurant. So if you do want to play here, you can actually play here either as a restaurant owner, or you can play here by visiting it as a restaurant. But it's kind of like one of those restaurants where if you go on a date, you could technically also go into the hammam and like make sure that your Sims have a really nice and relaxing time, or you can use the shisha lounge upstairs, which I think just adds fun gameplay for if your Sim go out on a dinner date. You can actually do more things than just have the dinner, because as we all know in The Sims, just the dinners are quite broken and doesn't necessarily make for a really great date. Something that was really challenging, or that I found really challenging with this build, is that we couldn't really do any landscaping, because this build is set in the middle of the desert, because, well, literally Cairo is set in the middle of the desert. So that was actually one of the rules or restrictions, that we were not allowed to add a lot of foliage or a lot of plants. But I still wanted to try and make the build look really fresh, so I end up adding a lot of potted plants to the build, because I still wanted to make sure to kind of incorporate that fresh element, that green element, without actually putting a lot of foliage around. So I feel like I kind of cheated my way around not being able to add too many plants, because I wanted to still make sure that we had that fresh look to the build. Something else that was like a huge challenge for this build was the fact that we had to use a lot of platforms. I think you've seen it from here already. The amount of platforms I've been adding to kind of create that modern look has been astonishing. And to be honest, this made it so difficult to later furnish the build, but also just in general to make sure that everything worked, because platforms in The Sims, just like round walls, are still a little bit broken, and it was such a challenge to get everything to work. But I feel like that's what you're in the builders games for, right? To really challenge yourself in how you use the game. And I think that's something that I kind of feared when I submitted this build, is that it does look like a little bit of a bland build. I don't want to say it's ugly, but it's definitely not super colorful. It doesn't have a lot of contrast to it. It uses a lot of sand color in a desert, which is obviously not the best contrast that you could go for. So I was a little bit scared that maybe the judges might think that it was not contrasty enough, or that it would look boring, or I don't know. I was a little bit scared that they might not like the build, especially considering other people went for a more traditional Arab style. So that had like kind of like the Oasis, was it called Oasis Desert? No, Oasis, I can't remember the name, but like the kit that has the Arab building style. Why can I not remember names whenever I need to use them in a voiceover? Anyways, they like kind of more that style, so that has obviously a lot more intricate details, a lot more colors to it. So I was a little bit scared if me going modern was a mistake, but it ended up actually being a good decision, because because of that reason the build really stood out, because it was super different from anything that the other people had done. One of the favorite things of this build personally for me is I end up adding these canopies from the toddler stuff pack in the front of the build, and I think they add so much nice detail. I got a lot of compliments from the judges about it as well, and I personally really liked it too, because it just made it look like one of those places that when it's super hot outside, you want to go sit there to cool down and have something nice to eat. And that was the whole point of this build. I wanted to make sure that it looked inviting and that it looked nice. Lastly, to share with you the results of this week, we actually placed 4th. It was a shared 4th place with 65 points, which is actually the highest score we've had in the competition so far. And to be honest, I'm not really sure if that's because there's less contenders, so all the points get divided differently, or whether the judges really thought that everyone stepped up their game so much in this week. Although I personally still think that my build from last week, the Norwegian build, was absolutely the best build I've ever done. I genuinely do think that I pushed my boundaries also in terms of patience and cluttering and stuff with this build. So I can see why this build scored well. I'm pretty proud of it, so I would really like it if you let me know in the comments down below what part of the build is your favorite in the end. As always, I always add like nice screenshots and stuff to the end of a speed build, so if you want to see like the finished product and you want to see some more interior shots, please make sure to stick around to the end of the video, because I always make sure to share it. Also, the fact that we placed 4th means that we get to go to the next week of the Builders Games. And for next week, the challenge, we actually get to pick a location again. So we get to pick either Seoul in South Korea or India And I actually, when recording this speed build, I have already finished the challenge for South Korea. So we actually went for the Seoul one. If you would like to see that, please keep an eye on my YouTube channel. So this would be a really good moment to subscribe as well, because then you wouldn't miss the speed build for Seoul. I actually think the Seoul speed build might be my most creative build I've ever done. So I would love it if you stick around for that one too, because I'm pretty proud of it. I will not spoil the scores yet, but feel free to keep an eye out for that speed build next week. And like always, we're building this live on my stream. So if you're ever interested in hanging out with me and the community while we do these builds, or just in general while we do some Sims gameplay or while we do other builds, you are more than welcome. My Twitch link is in the description box down below. I stream every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and we would love to have you there. And I think with all of that being said, that was it for the voiceover of today, because I really genuinely need to stop talking and give my voice some rest. I hope you enjoyed the rest of the video with some nice music. I would love to hear your feedback in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on the next one. Bye everyone.